In a field that is historically predominated by male authors, it is time to talk about some influential female science fiction authors. So, how did I define what is notable or what is influential? The first criteria is notoriety or fame. Your work has to reach a large audience. Specifically, if a non-science fiction fan knows your name, then that is something that might land you on this list. The other criteria I used is impact on the genre. I really want to see an author whose work has really influenced quite a lot of other science fiction authors. It also means that this list does skew pretty heavily towards some vintage female science fiction authors. So you should know that their work has just had more time to be influential. So just know that these aren't the only female sci-fi authors. These aren't even my favorite female sci-fi authors. That's right. These are just ones that fit both of those criteria, if at all possible. There are only 12 women on this list. That's right. I had to keep it small and short. I have another video that is being worked on. So if your favorite female sci-fi author didn't make this list, know that they might be in a future video. So let's talk about who these women were and what they were famous for. So starting at number 12, we have Joanna Russ. Known for her raging feminist critique against sexist roles, interspersed with humor and irony, she became the figurehead for feminism in science fiction. Her most famous work is easily The Female Man, combining utopian fiction and satire. She was born in the Bronx in New York City to two Jewish teacher parents and was always found writing in her notebooks. In many interviews, she states she thinks she was always angry. She was described as being fearless, incisive, and a radical, fitting the feisty feminist stereotype tempered with that sharp intellect and quick wit. She was friends with many science fiction writers at the time, especially Samuel Delany. She came out as a lesbian around the same time as The Female Man came out, but was otherwise tight-lipped about her personal life, which means we don't know that much more about her. Coming in at number 11, we have C.L. Moore, also known as Catherine Lucille Moore. Historically important for being one of the very first popular female science fiction authors, and most well known for a lot of her short stories. Her novel Jarell of Jory featured one of the first female protagonists in sword and sorcery fiction. Her stories are solidly in the pulp section of the sci-fi genre, with lots of action, with a tiny sprinkle of science, all held together by a little bit of psychological themes. One of her most famous short story compilations is Judgment Night, which has been reprinted as a SF masterwork. Born in Indiana, she spent much of her childhood chronically ill, so fantasy worlds became her fondest memories. She went to Indiana University and started publishing halfway through her time there. But she had to drop out of college due to the Great Depression and started working as a secretary. She began publishing under her initials CL to keep her employers from knowing that she had a side job as an author. In 1936, she got a fan letter from a fellow science fiction author named Henry Kuttner, who thought that she was a man and wanted to collaborate with her on a short story. Their story together was very successful, as was their future collaborations, as they continued to be pen pals back and forth, and eventually married in 1940. During their marriage, a lot of their work was done in collaboration and under joint pseudonyms. Examples include C.H. Liddell, Lawrence O'Donnell, and Louis Paget. It was quoted from friends that their collaborations were so seamless that one spouse would get on the typewriter and start a story and stop mid-sentence, and the other spouse would immediately sit down, pick up right where they left off without reading the story, and continue the story on from there. They proceeded like this back and forth until the story was finished. Oftentimes, they wouldn't even remember which part of the story which spouse came up with. Sadly, the duo was broken up when Henry died at the age of 42 of a heart attack. But C.L. Moore continued to write and eventually transitioned into television script writing. Coming in at number 10, it's none other than Andre Norton. She's famous for essentially winning the sci-fi author game. She is one of the most prolific science fiction and fantasy authors maybe to ever exist. That's right. Stand aside, Brandon Sanderson and Adrian Tchaikovsky. You got nothing on Andre Norton's over 300 titles throughout her lifetime. One of her most recognized works is Witchworld, which is the beginning of a sci-fantasy series. But honestly, her best work that I have read is her first ever science fiction novel, Daybreak 2240. Also known as Starman's Son. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, to a family who owned a rug company, she was always interested in being a writer and eventually became the editor of her school paper. During high school, she wrote her very first novel called Railstone Luck. Having to leave her college due to the Great Depression, she began to work for the library system. Several of her projects were terminated when America entered World War II. Thus, she moved back to Maryland, where she opened a bookstore called Mystery House. Sadly, this bookstore failed, but it brought her back to the library system, where she bided her time writing more books. Coming in at number 9, we have C.J. Cherryh, known for her intricate and realistic world building, as well as her vast research to present these worlds through implication rather than explication, as well as telling stories from an alien perspective instead of a human perspective. She is most well known for what many consider a cornerstone series. I'm talking about the ongoing 22 novel series that starts with Foreigner, which centers on descendants of a ship lost in space. One of the most recurrent characters is Bren, a human diplomat translator to the ruling alien nation. Born in St. Louis but raised in Oklahoma, she began to write out of frustration by age 10, when her favorite TV show, Flash Gordon, got canceled, and she never stopped writing from there. She majored in Latin, which specialized in mythology, archaeology, and engineering, and eventually got a master's in classic literature. During her summers, she was working in Europe, giving tours of ruins in England, and writing novels at night. Unlike many on the list, she didn't start in short stories or short fiction, and she has always skipped straight into novels. She is currently still alive and lives with her wife in the state of Washington, where I assume she is writing more Foreigner novels.
There are 3 types of people in the world: those who believe the universe is good, those who believe it to be corrupt, and those who do not want to think about it any more than they can help. I much prefer the first 2.
Coming in at number 8, we have James Tiptree Jr., also known as Alice Sheldon. Famous for the unsettling dark atmospheres with deep and complex explorations of psychology, she brought an exploration of identity and gender to the genre. Her most well-known work is a compilation of short stories, the most famous being her Smoke Rose Up Forever. Alice had a very tumultuous and infamous life, beginning with a tumultuous teenage marriage to a drunk that ended after 7 long years. Alice went from job to job, starting as a supply officer in the army and eventually becoming a photography intelligence officer in the army. She was later promoted to major and met her second husband in Paris right at the end of World War II. Later, she and her husband were eventually recruited into the CIA, but she quit after 3 years because she didn't like the work. While trying to figure out her career and go back to school, Alice began writing under a pseudonym. She got Tiptree from a jar of marmalade. And Junior was an addition that her husband recommended because, after all, most pseudonyms wouldn't have a junior on them, would they? Tiptree quickly gained acclaim in the SF community, and it was known that Tiptree was a pseudonym, but generally accepted to be protecting the identity of an intelligence operative. She became pen pals with many authors, including Ursula Le Guin, Joanna Russ, and Robert Silverberg, all of whom believed that she was a man. It wasn't until in 1977 she let slip that her father died in Chicago on a particular day, where an obsessed fan researched all the obituaries in Chicago for the day she mentioned and discovered that there was only a daughter listed as surviving him. And suddenly the jig was up. She confessed to her friends, and eventually it became well known in the SF community.
A male name seemed like good camouflage. I had the feeling that a man would slip by less observed. I've had too many experiences in my life of being the first woman in some damned occupation.
She continued to write under that pseudonym for another decade, but her infamy was not done yet. When her second husband became blind, she became his caretaker and really got to see how hard it was to witness his loss of faculties. She wrote to many of her friends talking about how she wanted to die before that happened to her. She also confessed to Robert Silverberg in a personal letter that her and her husband had a possible suicide pact. And in 1987, the police received a phone call of a confession from Miss Alice Sheldon confessing to shooting her husband. And by the time they got there, she had shot herself. The both were found holding hands in bed together. What an infamous life. Coming in at number 7, we have Lois McMaster Bujold. Famous for her heartfelt characters and one of the most awarded series of all of science fiction, the Vorkosigan Saga, which has won 4 individual Best Novel awards from the Hugos and many Nebula awards. Her famous protagonist, Miles Vorkosigan, is a physically impaired individual who has graduated from the Space Academy and gets himself into all kinds of conundrums, but gets out of it by depending on his intelligence, wit, and luck over his physical prowess, kind of instilling him into all of nerd culture in terms of relatability. Lois was born in Columbus, Ohio, to a famous engineer father with more than 19 patents, which is reflected in many of her characters who are overshadowed by their famous fathers. She self-identified as a voracious reader from a very young age, picking up science fiction from her father's work desk at the age of 9. She attended Ohio State and deciding not to major in English since it was, quote, too concerned with literary criticism instead of literary creation, unquote. She married John Bujold in 1971 and had 2 children. She returned to writing after the age of 30 and had a lot of help from fellow author Patricia Reed. She is currently teaching at Tennessee Tech as a metal artist and welder. And she is also very well known for her support of fan fiction of her characters. Looking forward to more of Lois's work. Coming in at number 6, we have the very divisive Madeline L'Engle. Famous for instigating an entire generation of children into loving and accepting the science fiction genre, her most famous work is the Time Quartet series that starts with A Wrinkle in Time. This book follows the young Meg Murray on her journey through space and time to rescue her father from the Black Thing, which may or may not have influenced the never-ending story. Born in New York City, her mother was a pianist and her father was a writer, critic, and foreign correspondent. She was a shy child and, like many others, retreated into the world of books and writing. Bouncing around governesses and boarding schools, as well as frequent European travel, it was a very tumultuous upbringing. She married a small-time actor, Hugh Franklin, who moved the family to Connecticut and opened a small general store. When financial troubles hit, Lingle decided to give up writing on her 40th birthday. Quote, "With all the hours I spent writing, I was still not pulling my own weight financially," unquote. But after returning to New York City, Lingle had the idea for A Wrinkle in Time while on a camping trip that she just couldn't give up on. Despite being rejected more than 30 times, it was finally given its chance and won many awards. Lingle credited her success to creating a character that was childlike, but not childish, thus allowing children to easier understand complex scientific concepts and philosophical ones.
The child will come to it with an open mind, whereas many adults come close to an open book. This is one reason so many writers turn to fantasy, which children claim as their own when they have something important and difficult to say.
Thank you, Madeleine L'Engle, for luring all of us generations who read your book into the love of science fiction. Starting at number 5, we have Anne McCaffrey. She is famous for being the first woman to ever win a Hugo Award, and later the first to ever win a Nebula Award. She is most well known for her Dragon Riders of Pern series, which is a sci fantasy series, and eventually had the third book in the series, known as The White Dragon, become the first science fiction book to ever make the New York Times bestseller list. Born in Massachusetts to an Irish family, she graduated with a degree in Slavonic languages and literature. She married Horace Wright Johnson and eventually moved to Long Island, where she became a full-time writer. Weeks after filing for her divorce, she and her children emigrated to Ireland, allowing her to network and eventually meet with Jack Cohen, who would become a consultant on the science of Pern. Despite the series' success, she still struggled financially, and it was only after publishing a young adult spin-off series that she was finally able to live off her wages and purchase a home for her family. Kind of makes you rethink how many books there are in the Dragon Riders of Pern, or at least it does me. Coming in at number 4, we have Octavia Butler. Known as one of the first women of African descent to break into science fiction, she does not stay away from any and all taboo subjects. Things like sexism, racism, and most heavily exploring all facets of consent. Her books are both easy to read and incredibly uncomfortable. Her books feature protagonists with very little agency in an unjust world, often in bleak circumstances, who are forced to do nothing but survive. She is most well known for the book Kindred, but also is well known for Parable of the Sower, which was her first book to make it to the New York Times bestseller list after her death. Born in Pasadena, California, in a Baptist home to a shoeshiner father and a very quickly widowed mother who cleaned houses, she was described as painfully shy and socially awkward. Her dyslexia led her to poor grades. Due to the incessant bullying and the peak of racial segregation, she sought the public library as a refuge, where she discovered science fiction. At the age of 10, she saw a bad sci-fi movie and decided that she could write a better story than that, and never stopped writing. Despite having very little success with her writing front, she was bouncing around from temp job to temp job until she finally attended a writer's workshop where her work caught science fiction author Harlan Ellison's eye. It was Harlan himself who bought some of her first short stories, and it was his mentorship that would springload her into the right circles to get many of her novels published. Her influential work has continued to echo down the science fiction genre today. If you're interested in knowing more about Octavia Butler, she is one of my all-time favorites. And I have an entire video just dedicated to her, her work, and where to start. So please check out Where to Start with Octavia Butler. I highly recommend it. I want to include a quote of a self-description that she wrote her very self.
Who am I? I am a 47-year-old writer. I'm also comfortably asocial, a hermit, a pessimist. If I'm not careful, a feminist, a black, a former Baptist, an oil and water combination of ambition, laziness, insecurity, certainty, and drive.
Coming in at number 3, we have Margaret Atwood. Known for deeply exploring themes of gender, power, and societal structures. Let's be real, she's famous for being able to stand toe-to-toe with one of the most well-known science fiction books of all time. I'm talking about 1984 and Brave New World. Margaret Atwood's book Handmaid's Tale has brought something new to the table of dystopian fiction. Born in Ottawa, in Ontario, Canada, to an entomologist and a dietitian, she spent most of her time in the backwoods of Quebec and did not attend school full-time until the age of 12. She was a voracious reader from a young age and wanted to write professionally since the age of 16. She attended school in Ontario, which eventually joined with Harvard, a very ultra-conservative and starchy arrangement that helped shape her opposition to the Americanization of Canada's culture, and also her obsession with trying to define Canadians as separate and different. After 2 broken engagements and a 5-year marriage to Jim Polk, she finally settled down with another Canadian writer named Graham Gibson and had a daughter. Atwood continues to teach and do speaking engagements around the world. However, she adamantly is opposed to the label of science fiction, saying that science fiction is not yet possible, while she maintains the idea that all of her work could actually happen. Interesting choice of terms, Margaret. I do think that what you write qualifies as science fiction as I define it.
I was that close. I touched it.
Coming in at number 2, we have none other than Ursula Le Guin. She is the breakout female sci-fi author. When people talk about females in science fiction, Ursula's name always comes up. Her work revolutionized science fiction with anthropology, feminism, and literary acclaim. Often her protagonists are watchers of society who take the view of an anthropologist, and many have noticed the recurrent importance of Taoism themes like balance and equilibrium. She combined culture and politics in a new way with unusual perspectives and experimental styles. She was also the first woman to sweep both the Hugo and the Nebula in the same year. And her most famous work is the work that accomplished that, Left Hand of Darkness, followed very closely by The Dispossessed. Her loosely linked Hainish cycle is probably one of her most influential work. Although personally, I have to say her nonfiction writings are almost more touching than her fiction. Born in Berkeley, California to an anthropologist father who focused on Native Americans and a psychologist mother, she grew up on folk tales and started writing at the age of 9. She and Philip K. Dick went to the same high school. Although they did not know each other, she later stated that she wrote a novella in homage to him, known as The Lathe of Heaven. She went on to get a master's degree in French, although she abandoned her doctorate to get married to Charles Le Guin. Her family was somewhat affluent and received visitors such as Robert Oppenheimer, who it is said she based her famous character Shevik from The Dispossessed on Robert Oppenheimer. Who knew? Of note, Ursula Le Guin was very passionate and outspoken about many strong beliefs and causes. One of the most infamous being Amazon's monopoly on ebooks and Google's digitalization project, for which she resigned her chair of the Authors Guild. She wrote,
You decided to deal with the devil. There are principles involved, above all the whole concept of copyright, and these you have seen fit to abandon to a corporation, on their terms, without a struggle.
That should give you a general idea of what Ursula was all about. And coming in at number 1, Mary Shelley. Famous for the groundbreaking, genre-defining Frankenstein, the book that practically invented modern-day science fiction, with its warnings of the dangers of science that war with our inner curiosity and our drive to know more, including ethical concerns about whether or not we should be advancing in science rather than can we. She also asks the very haunting question, are we, as creators, responsible for the actions of our creation? Think about AI. Born to a political philosopher father, the first proponent of modern anarchy, and her women rights advocate mother, sadly who died only after 11 days of giving birth to her, she was surrounded by deep thinkers and important people of the day, including Lord Byron and her eventual poet husband, Percy Shelley. She met Shelley at only age 17 at one of her father's parties. And despite him already being married, the couple decided to travel through Europe together and came back pregnant with their first child. Only after Percy's wife killed herself could the couple get married. Mary Shelley was haunted by her children's deaths. Some say this led to some of the creation of what she put into Victor Frankenstein's dilemma. Languishing at Lord Byron's one day, telling each other German ghost stories, Byron proposed that they all write their own ghost story. Everyone did it, but she was mortified because she couldn't think of one. Several days later, they engaged in a conversation about reanimation of corpses. And later that night, she had a bad dream, combining all of the things that happened to her, including the miscarriage, the reanimation of a corpse, and something darker still, and began to write the tale of Victor Frankenstein, also known as the modern Prometheus. She and Shelley's relationship was very short-lived when Percy Shelley's ship went under at sea, leaving his wife and his only living son to fend for themselves, both financially and for the rest of their lives. But don't worry, Mary Shelley continued to write, including one of the early post-apocalyptic novels called The Last Man. And that does it for my top 12 most influential females of science fiction. Let me know, as always, in the comment section down below. Until next time, you guys, see you in the next video.